The morning sunlight filtered softly through the curtains of Margaret's cozy suburban home. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, mixing with the faint scent of rain from the night before. Margaret stood by the kitchen counter, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. It was Saturday, and she had planned to meet her two friends for brunch downtown, something she looked forward to each week. But today felt different. There was a strange quietness in the house, kind that carried both peace and sadness. She turned when she heard footsteps behind her. Her son, Daniel, appeared in the doorway, dressed casually in jeans and a gray hoodie. His hair was slightly messy, and his expression was thoughtful. "Morning, Mom," he said with a warm smile that reminded her of when he was little. "Good morning, sweetheart," Margaret replied, smiling back. "You're up early for a weekend." Daniel hesitated before answering. "Yeah, I was thinking. Maybe we could stay home today. Just you and me." Margaret raised an eyebrow, caught off guard. Daniel was 23, always on the move, work, friends, plans that rarely involved her. He hadn't asked to spend the day with her in years. "Stay home?" she asked curiously. "What about your friends?" He shrugged. "They'll survive one weekend without me. I just wanted to hang out with you." For a second, she just looked at him, wondering if there was something he wasn't saying. But his expression was calm, genuine. A soft smile crept across her face. "All right," she said finally. "But you're making breakfast." That made Daniel laugh. "Deal." Margaret watched as he moved around the kitchen, mixing pancake batter and humming quietly. It felt strange, familiar, but foreign to see him like this again, at ease and smiling. For years, since her husband Mark's passing, their relationship had been polite but distant. They lived together, shared meals, but avoided the quiet moments that made them remember the empty space at the table. But today was different. There was no rush, no distractions. Just them. They sat together eating pancakes that were slightly burned on the edges, sipping coffee, talking about movies and small things that didn't matter but somehow meant everything. Margaret found herself laughing, really laughing. For the first time in a while, halfway through breakfast, she noticed Daniel watching her closely. "What?" she asked with a playful smile. "Nothing," he said, shaking his head. "It's just ... It's nice to see you laugh again." The words caught her by surprise. Her smile softened. "I guess I forgot how," she admitted quietly. Daniel nodded, looking down at his plate. "Yeah, I did too." The mood turned gentle and reflective. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the window, carrying the faint sound of birds. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was comfortable, almost healing. After clearing the dishes, they moved to the living room. The afternoon sun painted golden light across the old photographs on the wall. Pictures of family trips, holidays, moments frozen in time. Margaret followed Daniel's gaze to a framed photo of her late husband holding a much younger Daniel on his shoulders. He really loved that lake. Daniel said quietly. She smiled wistfully. He did. He said it was the only place he could breathe freely. Daniel looked at her then, his eyes thoughtful. "Do you ever feel like you stopped living after he was gone?" Margaret froze at the question. It was direct, painful, but not cruel. She swallowed hard. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I tried to move forward, but it's hard when every corner of this house reminds me of him." "I know," Daniel said softly. "I feel that too." There it was. The truth they had both avoided for years. They weren't just missing Mark. They were missing life itself. They had both been drifting, pretending things were normal. Daniel took a deep breath, his tone suddenly more serious. "Mom, I was thinking. Maybe we should start changing that." She tilted her head, confused. "Changing what?" "Everything," he said simply. "The way we live, the way we think. We can't keep holding on to the pain. I know it's not easy, but I don't want to see you lonely anymore. I don't want to be lonely either." Margaret felt something shift inside her, a quiet, unexpected ache that was part sadness, part hope. "And how do you suggest we do that?" she asked gently. He smiled faintly. "By starting small, just spending time together. Remembering who we were before everything got so quiet." Margaret looked at him, and for a brief moment, it was like looking at the boy she had raised, the one who used to follow her around with endless questions, who laughed freely, who filled the house with life. She blinked back tears and nodded. "All right," she said softly. "Let's start small." And that was how the day began, not with a grand plan or a bold decision, but with a shared desire to feel alive again. They spent the afternoon sorting through old photo albums stored in the attic, brushing off dust from memories long forgotten. Each picture held a story: Daniel's first day of school, Mark teaching him to ride a bike, Christmas mornings filled with laughter at one point. Daniel found a photo of Margaret in her 30s, smiling at the camera, her hair shining in the summer sun. "You look so happy here," he said. "I was," she replied quietly. Life felt simple back then. He looked at her meaningfully. "Maybe it can be simple again." His words lingered in her mind long after they stopped talking. Could life really be simple again? Could happiness return after so much loss? She didn't know, but she wanted to believe it as the evening settled in. They cooked dinner together, pasta with too much sauce and not enough seasoning, but it didn't matter. They talked about everything: his work, her garden, even the silly TV shows they both secretly liked. Before bed, Daniel stood by the doorway of her room. "Thanks for staying home today," he said quietly. Margaret smiled. "Thank you for asking me to." He hesitated before adding, "Tomorrow, I want to show you something. Something I've been planning." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Planning?" He nodded with a mysterious grin. "We'll see." And with that, he left her room, leaving her curious and oddly excited for the first time in years. That night, Margaret lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind drifted back to Daniel's words. Maybe it can be simple again. For the first time since her husband's passing, she didn't feel the weight of loneliness pressing on her chest. Instead, she felt warmth, a quiet, glowing sense of connection. She realized something important. Healing doesn't come from forgetting the past. It comes from remembering what's still worth living for. And as she closed her eyes, she couldn't help but smile softly. Tomorrow suddenly felt full of possibilities. The next morning began quietly. A thin mist covered the backyard, and Margaret stood by the window holding her cup of tea, lost in thought. The house felt alive again, not loud or busy, but warm in a way she hadn't felt for a long time. She heard Daniel moving around in the kitchen, humming to himself. It reminded her of when he was a boy, waking early on weekends to surprise her with burnt toast and orange juice. "Morning." "Mom," Daniel said as he peeked into the living room. "You ready for that surprise I mentioned?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "You're not going to tell me what it is first?" He grinned. "Nope, you'll have to trust me." That smile of his, so confident, so much like his father's, made her laugh. "All right, fine. Lead the way." Within an hour, they were in the car, driving through winding suburban streets and out toward the countryside. The radio played softly, an old song she hadn't heard in years. She wanted to ask where they were going, but decided to let the suspense build. The world outside the window looked alive, trees glowing gold under the morning sun, birds darting across the open sky. Finally, Daniel turned onto a quiet dirt road that led to a small lake surrounded by tall pines. Margaret's heart caught in her chest. She knew this place instantly. "Daniel," she whispered. "This is the lake Dad loved," he finished softly. "Yeah, I thought it was time we came back." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She hadn't been here since Mark's passing. She'd avoided it, afraid of reopening old wounds. The memories here were too strong: laughter, picnics, the sound of Daniel's young voice echoing across the water. I found the old photo album yesterday." Daniel interrupted gently. "I figured maybe we both needed to come here, to remember the good things, not just the loss." She smiled through her tears. "You're thoughtful. You know that?" He shrugged, pretending not to be emotional. "Well, I learned from the best." They got out of the car, the air cool and fresh. The lake shimmered like glass under the sunlight. The sound of the water lapping softly against the shore filled the silence between them. Margaret walked slowly toward the edge, her shoes crunching the gravel. For a moment, She felt her husband's presence not in a sad way, but as though he was gently reminding her that life hadn't stopped, that she was still here for a reason. Daniel laid out a small picnic blanket, pulling sandwiches and coffee from a basket. "I figured we could have lunch here," he said casually. Margaret sat down beside him, smiling. "You've thought of everything." "It's trying to make up for all those years I forgot your birthday," he joked. She laughed. "Well, this makes up for most of them." They ate. They talked about life in a way they hadn't before, not just about daily routines, but about dreams, regrets, and fears. Daniel opened up about how he'd been feeling lost lately, unsure of his direction. His father's death had left him not just sad, but uncertain about his future. "I think I tried too hard to act strong," he admitted. "I didn't want you to see me break." Margaret placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You don't have to be strong all the time, Daniel. Sometimes letting yourself feel is the strongest thing you can do." He looked at her, his eyes soft. "You always say the right thing," she smiled. "That's because I've had a lot of time to think about what I should have said before." The sun climbed higher, the lake sparkling brighter. Margaret leaned back, feeling lighter than she had in years. For once, she wasn't thinking about the past or worrying about what was next. She was simply there, present, alive, and surrounded by love. After a while, Daniel stood up, brushing crumbs from his jeans. "Come on," he said. "I've got one more surprise." "Oh, dear," Margaret said, pretending to groan. "Another one?" "You'll like this one," he promised. He led her down a small trail that curved along the edge of the lake. The trees formed a canopy above them, their leaves rustling softly in the breeze. They walked in silence for a few minutes until they reached a small wooden bench overlooking the water. Margaret froze when she saw the small brass plaque on the bench. It read, "In loving memory of Mark Reynolds, a man who taught us that love never really leaves." Her hand trembled as she traced the engraved words. Daniel's voice was quiet but steady behind her. "I saved up and had it made last month. I didn't tell you because I wanted it to be special." Margaret felt her throat tighten. "It's beautiful, Daniel. Your father would have loved this." "I thought so too," he said softly. I wanted us to have a place to come back to. Not to be sad, but to remember." Margaret sat down slowly, her heart full. "He'd be proud of you," she whispered. Daniel sat beside her, and for a while they just looked out over the lake. The wind rippled the surface, carrying small waves to the shore. It felt peaceful, a quiet that wasn't empty, but comforting. After some time, Daniel turned to her with a small smile. "I'm glad we came here, Mom." "Me too," she said sincerely. "You gave me something I didn't know I needed a chance to let go." He nodded. "That's all I wanted." They sat together for hours, talking, laughing, and sharing stories about Mark, his terrible cooking, his love for fishing, his unstoppable optimism. The laughter felt healing, like sunlight after years of rain, as the sky began to shift into evening shades of orange and pink. They packed up their things and headed back to the car. The ride home was quiet but full of warmth. Margaret rested her hand on Daniel's arm as they drove, feeling grateful not just for the day, but for the bond that had slowly begun to heal when they reached home. Daniel helped her carry the picnic basket inside. "You tired?" he asked. "Just the good kind of tired," she said with a smile. He grinned. "Then it was a successful day." Before heading to his room, Daniel paused in the hallway. "Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart." "I was thinking, maybe we could make this a thing. Saturdays for us. No phones, no distractions." Margaret felt her chest tighten with emotion. "I'd love that," she said softly, as Daniel went upstairs. Margaret lingered by the window, watching the last light fade from the sky. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the ache of loneliness. Instead, she felt peace, a sense that life, no matter how broken it once was, could be rebuilt piece by piece. The day had been more than just a visit to a lake. It had been a bridge, one that connected past love with present hope. And as the stars began to appear, she whispered to herself, "Thank you. Mark, you brought him back to me." Sunday morning came softly. Sunlight spilling through the curtains and the faint sound of birds filled the quiet house. Margaret woke up feeling lighter, her heart still glowing from the day at the lake. She walked into the kitchen to find Daniel already there, making breakfast. The smell of coffee and toast filled the air, a smell that instantly brought warmth to her heart. "Morning, Mom," Daniel said cheerfully, holding a mug toward her. "I made it just how you like, 2 sugars, no cream." She smiled, touched. "You remember?" "Course I do," he said, setting the mug in front of her. "I pay attention more than you think." They shared a small laugh. But there was something different about Daniel that morning, a calmness, a kind of quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. He moved with ease, smiling more, and Margaret could tell that yesterday had done something for both of them. The lake had opened a door that had been closed for too long. After breakfast, Daniel helped her clean up, humming to himself. Margaret leaned against the counter, watching him. It struck her how much he'd grown, not just in age, but in heart. She thought of the young boy who used to run to her for every scraped knee, every bit of advice. And now here he was, grown, thoughtful, and caring in ways she hadn't expected. "Daniel," she said softly, "I just want you to know yesterday meant a lot to me." He looked up, his expression gentle. "It meant a lot to me too, Mom, I think. I needed it more than I realized." Margaret smiled, but didn't say more. Some moments didn't need words. Later that afternoon, Daniel suggested they go through the attic, the one place Margaret had avoided since Mark's passing. "You said you've been meaning to clean it," he said. "Why don't we do it together?" Margaret hesitated at first. That attic held boxes full of old memories, photographs, letters, and the little things she hadn't been able to part with. But looking at Daniel's eager face, she nodded. "All right, let's do it." They climbed up the narrow stairs, the air filled with the scent of dust and time. Sunlight filtered in through a small window, lighting up stacks of boxes and old furniture. Daniel opened the first box and pulled out a few photo albums. "Wow, look at this," he said, flipping through a page. "You two look so young here." Margaret laughed softly. That was our first summer after moving here." They sat on an old rug, surrounded by boxes, looking through the photos. Each picture brought back a flood of memories, birthdays, holidays, lazy Sundays. Daniel kept asking questions, eager to hear stories from before he could remember. And Margaret found herself talking more than she had in years, her voice carrying both laughter and tears in one box. Daniel found a stack of old letters tied with a faded ribbon. "Are these from Dad?" Margaret nodded. "Yes, he used to write me letters even when we lived in the same house. Said it helped him express things better on paper." Daniel smiled, untying the ribbon. "Can I read one?" "Of course," she said softly. He opened one carefully. The paper was yellowed with age, the handwriting neat but full of emotion. Daniel read aloud a few lines, his voice trembling slightly as he went. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, it means I've once again failed to say how lucky I am to have you face to face. You hold our little world together in ways words can't describe." Daniel stopped reading, his voice catching. Margaret placed a hand over his. "It's okay," she whispered. "He always wrote from the heart." Daniel nodded, blinking back tears. "He really loved you, Mom." "Yes," she said quietly. "And I loved him. Still do." They sat there for a long time, surrounded by the echoes of a life once lived. The laughter, the love, the losses. The attic didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt sacred, like a place where love had simply changed form, as they packed the letters back carefully. Daniel found something else, a small, unmarked envelope. Inside was a faded drawing, a stick figure family of 3, labeled Mom, Dad, and me. He laughed softly. "I remember this. I made it in kindergarten." Margaret smiled, tears in her eyes. "Your father kept it in his wallet until the day he—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Daniel looked at the drawing again, quiet for a moment. Then he said something that caught her completely off guard. "Mom, I think Dad would want you to live again." Margaret froze, unsure how to respond. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath. "You spent so many years keeping things just as they were. The same furniture, the same curtains, the same routines. It's like you've been waiting. But maybe it's time to move forward. Not forget him, never that, but to live again." His words sank deep. She wanted to protest, but he was right. She had been living in a pause, holding her breath for years, afraid that moving on meant letting go. "I don't even know how to start," she admitted quietly. Daniel smiled gently. "Then start small. Go out, meet people, try something new. I'll help you." She laughed softly, half in disbelief. "You're giving me advice now." "Guess the roles reversed," he said with a grin. Margaret looked at him, pride and love swelling in her chest. Her son, once the boy who needed her for everything, was now the man helping her heal. As the day faded, they carried the boxes downstairs, their arms full but their hearts lighter. Margaret looked around the living room, feeling something she hadn't in a long time. Hope that evening. They sat together on the couch, sipping tea and watching the sunset through the window. The sky was painted in soft golds and pinks, the same colors that had filled the sky at the lake. Daniel turned to her suddenly. "Mom, can I tell you something else?" She nodded. "Of course." He hesitated, then said, "You're stronger than you think. I know you've been through a lot, but you're still here. You still make people feel loved. That's something special." Margaret's throat tightened. "Where did you learn to say things like that?" He smiled. "From you." She laughed softly, but tears filled her eyes. "You have no idea how much that means to me." He reached over and squeezed her hand. "I think I do." The moment was simple, yet powerful. A bridge between generations, between grief and healing, between holding on and letting go. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, Margaret leaned her head against her son's shoulder. She didn't say anything, and she didn't need to. Everything she wanted to express, love, gratitude, peace, was already understood. That night, after Daniel went to bed, she stood by the window once more, looking up at the stars. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. She felt surrounded by memories, by love, and by the quiet certainty that life still had beauty left for her to find. She whispered softly, "I'm trying, Mark, just like you'd want me to." And for the first time in a long while, she truly meant it. The days that followed were quiet but full of a strange, comforting energy. Margaret moved through the house with a lighter step, her heart no longer burdened by the silence that had once haunted her. Daniel noticed it too. The way she hummed while making coffee, the way she lingered by the window in the morning sunlight. It wasn't just that she was smiling more. It was that she was living again. One morning, Daniel found her at the kitchen table with a notepad. "What's that?" he asked. Margaret looked up with a shy smile. "A list," she said. "Things I want to do before the end of the year." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "A bucket list. That's new." "Maybe it's about time for new things," she said, tapping the page. "I've been thinking about taking an art class. Your father always said I had an eye for colors." Daniel grinned. "That's great, Mom. You should go for it." And she did. The next week, Margaret joined a small community art group at the local cultural center. The first day, she walked in nervously, clutching her sketchbook. The room smelled of paint and coffee, and gentle chatter filled the air. She sat by the window and began sketching a vase of sunflowers. The strokes were rough at first, hesitant, but soon her hand moved with growing confidence. For the first time in years, she felt time slip away without the weight of sadness pulling her back. When she returned home, Daniel was waiting. "So, how was it?" Her eyes sparkled. "It was wonderful," she said. "I met people my age, and everyone was so kind." It felt freeing. Daniel smiled proudly. "Told you it was time." The weeks went by, and the house began to feel different. Margaret replaced the old curtains with brighter ones, rearranged the furniture, and even put fresh flowers on the dining table, something she hadn't done in years. The house no longer felt like a museum of memories. It felt alive again. One Saturday, as she was tidying the living room, the doorbell rang. A man stood there, gray-haired, tall, with kind blue eyes and a gentle smile. "Hi, Margaret," he said warmly. "I'm Tom from the art group. You left your sketchbook at class." "Oh," she said, surprised. "I didn't even realize." "Thank you so much." He handed it over, his smile lingering. "You've got real talent, you know. That sunflower piece was beautiful." She blushed slightly. "You're kind to say that." "Well," he said, glancing at the flowers on the table, "looks like you've got inspiration everywhere." Margaret laughed softly. "I suppose I do." Before he left, he asked, "There's an art exhibit next weekend, a local showcase. Would you like to come? Maybe we could go together." She hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. "I'd like that." When Daniel came home later, she told him about it, half expecting him to be surprised. Instead, he smiled. "That's great, Mom. You should go. It's just coffee and art, right?" She nodded, though she knew it was more than that. It was her first step towards something new, something that scared her and excited her all at once. The following Saturday, Margaret stood in front of her mirror, adjusting a simple blue dress. It had been years since she'd worn it, but it fit perfectly. She tied a silver scarf around her neck, took a deep breath, and smiled at her reflection. She didn't look young again. She looked alive. At the gallery, she found Tom waiting by the entrance. "You look lovely," he said sincerely. "Thank you," she replied, her voice soft but steady. They walked together through the exhibit, talking about art, life, and the little things that make days meaningful. Tom was easy to talk to, gentle, humorous, and kind. Margaret found herself laughing more than she expected. At one point, as they stood before a painting of a quiet lake at sunset, Tom said, "That reminds me of peace, the kind that comes after storms." Margaret nodded slowly. "Yes, it does." By the end of the evening, she realized something remarkable. She hadn't once felt guilty for enjoying herself. She didn't feel like she was betraying the past. Instead, she felt like she was honoring it by choosing to live well when she returned home. Daniel was still up, reading on the couch. He looked up and smiled. "You look happy." "I am," she said simply. "It was a good evening." He nodded, setting his book aside. "I'm proud of you, Mom." Margaret sat beside him, resting her hand over his. "I'm proud of us, Daniel. We both found a way to move forward." In the following months, life blossomed quietly. Margaret continued her art classes and often spent her mornings painting by the window. Daniel started working remotely again, but he made time for long walks with her in the evenings. Sometimes Tom joined them for coffee, and Daniel could see how his mother's eyes lit up whenever he spoke. One evening, as autumn painted the town in gold and amber, Daniel said, "You know, when I first suggested staying here, I just wanted us to reconnect. But I think it changed more than that." Margaret smiled knowingly. "It changed everything." He nodded. "I see Dad in you. Mom, not in the way you hold on, but in the way you keep loving." Her eyes softened. "That's the only way to live, Daniel. To love even when it hurts, even when it changes." They watched the sunset together, quiet but full of peace. The same sky that had once symbolized loss now shimmered with promise. A few days later, Margaret's art class hosted a small showcase. She displayed one of her own paintings, a lake at sunset, two figures in the distance, standing side by side. Beneath it, she'd written a small caption, "Finding peace in the place love once left." People stopped to admire it, praising its emotion and warmth. When Tom approached, he smiled. "That's beautiful, Margaret. It feels real." "It is," she said softly. "Every color came from something I felt." After the event, as they walked outside, Tom offered his arm. "Dinner? My treat." Margaret hesitated for just a second, then took his arm. "Dinner sounds nice." Back home, later that night, Daniel found the house quiet but peaceful. On the table, he noticed something new, the framed painting of the lake. He smiled to himself, realizing that his mother had found her way back to life, not by forgetting, but by growing through her pain. That night, when Margaret returned home, she peeked into Daniel's room. He was asleep, the faint glow of his phone lighting his face. She smiled, whispering, "Thank you, my son." Then she went to her own room, looked out the window at the stars, and for the first time, she didn't feel the need to talk to her late husband. She knew he'd be proud, proud that she was living, smiling, and still loving. She whispered to the night, "I'm okay now." And somewhere deep inside, she knew it was true.